Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about why the University Grants Commission is insisting that the university exams take place in September and why some states are against this. We will also talk about why the state of Bihar is going under a lockdown again. But first, we talk about the India-China border crisis. The ongoing crisis between the two countries taking place in eastern Ladakh has been unprecedented in many ways. From the Chinese ingressing along at least 4 points on the LAC and changing the status quo, to the violent clashes that took place between the two sides on June 15 and that killed 20 Indian soldiers. Clashes such as this had not taken place in more than 5 decades. Tensions have been high between India and China since early May. But Indian Express has now learned that the first reports about the movement of Chinese troops on the Chinese side of the line of actual control had actually come in mid-April, 2 weeks before the two sides came to blows on the north bank of Pegongso on the 5th and 6th of May. In this segment, Sushant Singh, Indian Express's deputy editor who broke the story, joins us to talk about why this crisis came as a surprise despite there being intelligence about it, the gap in communication between intelligence agencies and the army, and the biggest lessons India can learn from this. Sushant, you have reported that there were signs of movement by the Chinese army along the Chinese side of the LAC 2 weeks before the two armies clashed at Pegongso. Could you talk about what the Indian army knew about this and what did they end up doing?
So the thing is that in mid-April, one of the Indian intelligence agencies actually filed a report where they said that there was some Chinese troop movement on the Chinese side of the border in Tibet. And 4 days after that, that is around the third week of April, they filed a more detailed report saying that a large number of Chinese military vehicles were seen moving from opposite Depsang, that is in southern Ladakh, and going northwards on the road. That is the first information that anyone has of the Chinese army movement in those areas. But this must be seen in the light of this fact that the Chinese army comes and does military training exercises every summer in that area. And those training exercises areas are not very far off from the LAC. So what the army says is that, of course, everybody knew that the Chinese army was there, but they, in an act which is more like a breach of trust, more like a betrayal, they diverted their troops from the training area, from the exercise area, to these standoff points on the line of actual control. And that is where this clash on the night of 5th and 6th June took place. So while, of course, there were inputs, it's believed that the hostile intent of the Chinese army, of the PLA, could not be read properly. And the Indian army even initially thought that most of these incidents were isolated incidents, which is what Chief of the Army Staff, General M.M. Narwane, actually said at a conference on 15th of May. Even on May 15th, he believed that these were all isolated incidents and they were not connected to a larger story. But clearly, that is something which was to be proven wrong as Chinese deployment increased on the line of actual control, and the Indian army also deployed in equal strength on its side.
We also understand that there were some gaps in communication between the intelligence agencies and the army. Could you talk a bit about what those gaps were?
So the agency said that they had filed the report on, as I said, mid-April and in the third week of April. But the army says that the first report that it got from any agency about the Chinese vehicular movement was in early May. And even those Chinese military vehicular movement were referred to as being employed for infrastructure construction. So they say that there was nothing, no such reports that they got, but they, in any case, responded to all the Chinese provocations in good strength, in well within time, from whatever troops that were available to them in eastern Ladakh. There's an independent armored brigade there, there's an independent infantry brigade, there is 3 division, the troops of 3 division. They were all employed to prevent any kind of Chinese dominance. And as the Chinese build up their strength of troops on the line of actual control by the end of May and early June, the Indian army also moved its troops, as we know now, from Pathankot and Bareilly into the sector.
You also write that there is a debate about this initial response to the crisis, whether it has been our inability to read the Chinese actions or because of the disbandment of the Joint Intelligence Committee. So could you talk a bit about this committee and why was it disbanded?
So the Joint Intelligence Committee had been historically in place for many years. It has been defunct at times, but got revived after the Kargil War. Because even during the Kargil War, it was believed that the Joint Intelligence Committee had not functioned properly. Joint Intelligence Committee is where everybody, all these agencies, government departments like the Foreign Ministry, Military Intelligence, everybody would come. These paramilitary forces, ITBP, and everybody would come, and there would be a weekly meeting which would be chaired by chairman of Joint Intelligence Committee, who was seen as to be equivalent of Director Intelligence Bureau or the head of RNAW. An intelligence officer of that level would chair the meeting every week, where everybody would share their information for the week sitting in the same room, which would allow that information to clearly be shared and exchanged, and people could interpret and organize it in that manner. That was the most proven mechanism through which information was shared and exchanged on a real time basis between all the stakeholders. In 2018, late 2018, a reform of the National Security Council secretariat structure was done, where the post of chairman JIC was converted into the post of Deputy National Security Advisor, Internal Security. R.N. Ravi, who's now the governor of Nagaland, was the last chairman of JIC, and he then took over as the Deputy NSA for Internal Security. Simultaneously, two other posts of Deputy NSA were created, one for external and one for technology. And there was another military advisor, a lieutenant general, brought in there. So this new structure did away with the JIC, and the staff of the JIC, which was there, was pushed into other places. So there is no organized mechanism, no organized structure which exists now where information could be shared or exchanged as it was done earlier. Most of the senior intelligence officers that I spoke to actually believe that it is the disbandment of the JIC which has led to this crisis in Ladakh, almost like Kargil.
So, I mean, yeah, you mentioned Kargil, and even previously on the podcast, you mentioned that in Kargil, the Indian army was caught off guard. So, what are the similarities between then and what has happened now?
Clearly, the one big factor is surprise. The fact that a foreign army could come and surprise you, despite India having far greater intelligence resources now, that is the biggest thing. And as I said earlier, the Indians believe that it was a breach of trust by the Chinese by not following the long-standing norm of going back to their bases after the training exercise and instead diverting those troops to these standoff points that the crisis erupted. In the case of Kargil, it was Pakistan Army which was doing it. In Ladakh, it is the Chinese army which has done it. The second similarity is that the warning signs were clearly not read or missed because of whether they fell through the cracks, because they were not shared with the right people, or the assessment of the information which was coming in was not made properly. The hostile intentions of the Chinese could not be read correctly. So we were caught off guard, we were surprised, and we were left, to do the matching up very quickly and very soon.
So, in a scenario like this, what lessons can be learned and how can those lessons be implemented on the ground now?
The big lesson to learn is that, the intelligence setup, the process of assessing, analyzing, sharing intelligence, exchanging intelligence has to be on a real time basis. It has to be with all these stakeholders that is done. That is one big lesson. The processes should be reviewed holistically the way they were done after the Kargil War. As you know, after the Kargil War, a Kargil Review Committee under K. Subramaniam was formed, and that provided the basis for all the reforms that were carried out after the Kargil War. A similar review should be carried out, which is a holistic review, and the report should be put in the public domain, which allows you to do that. The second big lesson is that army should not look at the intentions of the Chinese, but should look at their capacity. If the Chinese are doing a training exercise, if they have got some 30,000, 20,000, whatever the number of troops, 200 kilometers away from the line of actual control, we should not at any point in time believe that they will not divert those troops to the LAC and will continue to do the exercise. There's an old military saying that you do not prepare for intentions, you prepare for an adversary's capacities. So that is the second big lesson that has to be learned. And the third big lesson is about exchanging of information, that the kind of information that has been shared with the Indian public, as you know, there has been hardly any official briefing, hardly any official statements, and the government has been talking in multiple conflicting voices, including statements by the Prime Minister, which have not really gone down well, which had to be clarified again and again. So the communication with the people, the lack of information which the people have officially from the government is the third thing which needs to be amended. There are three clear lessons which can be drawn as of now.
Before we get to the next segment, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there is perhaps no other place that does that better than Indian Express's Explained section. We on Three Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of Indian Express, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and access the coverage 24/7. Explained by Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. Next, we talk about exams. Among everything else that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected are also education institutes and how students appear for examinations. By the end of March, all education institutes were closed, the entire academic calendar was appended, and school boards across the country had to abandon their exams midway. Boards like the CBSE, after scrapping the remaining exams, had to devise an alternative marking scheme for students. Now there is a big question as to what will happen to college and higher education final exams that still remain pending and whether they will be cancelled as well. It is keeping this in mind that back in April, the University Grants Commission, or UGC, the higher education regulator for the government, had come up with guidelines to help universities form their exam calendars and admission sessions. This included guidelines about when final year exams should take place this year. In this segment, Ritika Chopra, who reports on education for the Indian Express, joins us to talk about what these guidelines said, how they have been revised since then, and caused a controversy. She first talks about the guidelines that UGC came up with in April.
So the UGC on the 29th of April said that universities, colleges, and all higher education institutions should hold their exams for final year students between the 1st of July and 15th of July. So exams would have been held in the first 2 weeks of July.
These guidelines, it had said, were only advisory in nature and that universities had flexibility to tweak these, depending on what the ground situation is in their region. Asking universities that they could hold exams in July, the government had been thinking that the COVID-19 situation would become much better by now.
What actually happened is that, the current situation is much worse. And through May and June, it got progressively worse. And what started happening in June is that since universities and all higher education institutions had the autonomy to deal with this in their own way, we had a lot of different approaches to this problem. So certain states decided to scrap exams altogether. There were universities which said that, okay, fine, we can't call students in person, so we're going to hold examinations online. That was a problematic decision because a lot of students did not have the tools to actually sit for such an exam.
We are now in the middle of July, and the exams, of course, have not taken place. Ritika says that based on her conversations with officials, the government seemed to be under pressure to come up with a new set of guidelines and bring some kind of uniformity when it came to examinations for higher education institutes. This is because different states were planning to take different decisions.
I don't know what the basis is of this assessment, but the government felt that there could be chaos. So in the last week of June, the HRD ministry asked the UGC to revisit the guidelines that they brought out on the 29th of April and come up with new suggestions. Again, I would like to emphasize that we were again told that these would be new set of suggestions. On the 6th of July, and this is what was finally decided, on the 6th of July, the university brought out a new set of guidelines which said that instead of holding the final year exams between 1st and 15th of July, you have time up to September to do that. And the universities have flexibility to hold these exams either in the online mode, offline mode, or blended mode. It didn't really go into details of what it meant by online, offline, and blended. But what was clear and what UGC made clear is that it is compulsory for you to hold final year exams.
UGC's stand seems to be that we didn't say it would be compulsory earlier, but we didn't say it wouldn't be either. So now universities must hold exams and they have 3 months to prepare for them. At least 6 states that include Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Orissa, Punjab, Delhi, and West Bengal have opposed these new guidelines. These are states that had earlier cancelled the final exams in June, and there is a tussle going on between these states and the center right now. And from what UGC is saying now, there are regulations that actually make these guidelines binding.
They have quoted two UGC regulations, one on awarding first degree and another regulation, which I think is called minimum standards for awarding master's degree. And these regulations actually specifically state that as far as examinations are concerned, higher education institutions will have to adopt guidelines issued by UGC from time to time. So that's the argument that the government's making, that the UGC regulations make this compulsory, and if we have issued this, you have to adopt it. And they have been writing to states to reconsider the decision to scrap exams.
Right now, there seems to be no clarity as to why UGC wants exams to take place in September. Perhaps it is hoping that things will get better by then. But officials off the record are saying that even this deadline could change. But the question is, why have exams right now in the first place?
So the government's argument is that we don't want to tag the future of these students to the pandemic. So the pandemic, we're hoping is temporary, things would get better. But they feel that this degree that you would have earned without an examination won't really hold any weight. I mean, once you're out in the job market, this degree would be no better than just a piece of paper, and that this would actually affect the employability of students. So actually, the higher education secretary has gone on record to say that, this decision may seem harsh now, but students should try and understand that this decision has been made thinking of the larger picture, what's going to happen in the long term. And it's important that they sit for these exams so that these degrees have some value, have some meaning, because this would affect their employability in the long term.
So far, we have been talking about higher education exams. But when it comes to school exams, like mentioned in the beginning of the segment, school boards this time had to cancel their remaining exams. So why is it that the government was okay to cancel school exams and is not willing to cancel university exams? This is a question that Ritika has asked officials as well.
What I've been told is that, it would be unfair to compare their decision on board exams to their decision as far as university exams are concerned, because as far as school students are concerned, a majority of them actually have either completed their board exams or had at least appeared for most of their papers. So they're saying that almost all these students have appeared for some form of an examination. So it's not like they are being passed en masse without having sat for any exam. They're saying the demands that are being made of us as far as college students are concerned is that you give us the pass grade without any examination. So they're saying that is something that's not okay with us, and that will probably also reflect on your degree, which is why that degree would be of no use.
The other question in the matter is that, can exams be done away with this year? Why not come up with a new and better system? Here, Ritika says that exams do work and can work even now, but one doesn't have to use the dreaded pen and paper system for everything. Exams can be incorporated in a much more balanced way.
So, for instance, if you have to assess research skills, then you can actually ask a student to submit a project. If your oratory skills matter, then you can actually ask the student to make a presentation. For instance, if you want to test the depth of a student's knowledge in, say, just one single topic, then you can probably, ask them to write an essay or maybe even have a debate about it. Examinations can work well in this, where you use that to assess certain disciplines and not use that as a form of assessment for everything.
But exams, the way they are, have been misused, Ritika says, and end up mainly encouraging the memorization of disjointed facts. In recent years, there have been some attempts to come up with alternative methods, but they haven't really worked out. Like in 2009, when CBSE decided to make Class 10 board exams optional.
So what had happened is that the government said that Class 10 students can opt to sit for an examination, which would be evaluated by external examiners, and that would be the board exam. But then again, this exam would not test you on whatever you've learned throughout the year. It would only test you on what had been taught in the last semester. This board exam would account for, say, 40% of the marks. The remaining marks would depend on your performance in internal assessments conducted by the school. This was abandoned, I think, about 7-8 years later, if I'm not wrong, around 2018, they brought this back. The argument given that, how do I put this? This argument that we hear all the time that, parents had noticed and teachers had noticed a drop in the academic standards and students weren't really serious enough about class 10 anymore, and which is why they brought it back. It was brought back by the NDA government on those grounds. I don't really have an answer for why are we so obsessed about marks, and marks especially that have been secured only by sitting for a pen and paper exam. But this was the last attempt, or rather the most recent attempt that I could think of, and it was abandoned after 7-8 years.
And in the end, we talk about Bihar. Bihar has been witnessing a rise in cases since the beginning of this month. Patna and 7 other districts have been under lockdown since the 8th of July. But now, the lockdown has been extended to the entire state. It has also been concerning that over 50 staff working in the residence of Chief Minister Nitish Kumar have tested positive. In this segment, Santosh Singh, who reports on Bihar for the newspaper, joins us on a call to talk about why the state is struggling to manage the COVID-19 crisis. Santosh, earlier Patna and several other districts like Bhagalpur and Begusarai were already under lockdown, and now the entire state of Bihar has gone under lockdown again. What exactly has led to this?
See, on 1st July, we had 10,205 cases. In a matter of 15 days, we have almost touched 19,000. That shows the spurt. At least 10 Bihar districts, including in Patna, Bhagalpur, East Champaran, West Champaran, Gopalganj, Begusarai, at least 10 of 38 districts have shown spurt in last fortnight. So that was one region of concern. So there could be 3 regions. After, say, June 1st, anybody coming to Bihar is not getting quarantined. Some 40 lakh people have already returned to Bihar. Some 15 lakh of them had to be quarantined. They have gone back home. So those who have returned after June 1st, you do not know where they are going. Government doesn't have the track record. There is no tracking system. And plus, there are asymptomatic cases. So, number one, there has not been enough test. People are throwing caution to the wind. People are not following any safety measures. And even in a state capital of Patna, not more than 30% people are wearing masks. No social distancing maintained. There is a huge crowd in marketplaces, especially in vegetable markets and fruit markets. So people have developed social fatigue with the previous lockdown, and they had complete disdain for rules. So that was reflecting somewhere in the recent spurt, which is very alarming. Earlier, we had 5 to 7% of those tested were found negative. Now it is 10 to 12%. That was one region of concern. Plus, it has reached the power circle. Some 50 staffers of connected with CM house were tested positive. 7 staffers of Deputy CM office. Now the BJP state president tested positive. There 7 functionaries tested positive. Additional home secretary tested positive. So it has reached everywhere. There was cause of concern. The chief minister and deputy chief minister had gone for their test. Luckily, they were tested negative after Legislative Council chairman Abdesh Singh was tested positive. So there was region of concern. Even the Deputy CM Sujil Kumar Modi yesterday said, okay, we had not taken enough safety measures. That's why lockdown was necessitated.
In terms of just handling the crisis, handling the pandemic, with people not following social distancing norms, not wearing masks, and just with the cases rising, what are the kind of challenges that the government is facing in trying to get things in order?
Multiple challenges. A challenge at district level. You have 9 medical colleges. 3 medical colleges were already declared COVID hospitals. That were Bhagalpur and Gaya and NMCH Patna. And now the 4th hospital is AIMS Patna. They have declared. And plus 6 hospitals, medical colleges have been asked to set apart 50% of beds as isolation beds for COVID patients. But most of the districts still do not have ventilators. That is one reason of concern. Luckily, we just have 143 odd deaths so far. We don't have level 3 cases as per ICMR guidelines so far. That's a good sign so far. We don't have much symptomatic cases. We have maximum asymptomatic cases. They are in level 1 hospital and maximum level 2. They don't have to go to COVID hospitals. But things can worsen. You can take the example of Bhagalpur. Bhagalpur people are not getting tested. Even it is happening in Patna. So every district has been allotted a fixed number because they are now for last 7-8 days they are testing say 9,500 to 10,000 cases. Earlier it was only 4,000 to 500. So there are 38 districts, so number of tests in a way fixed. But when the number is rising, there has been frustration. So one problem is to getting enough tests done at district level so that there is not much pressure on your COVID hospital or for that matter, Patna. So getting enough tests done, that is one reason of concern, enough oxygen cylinders, and also ventilators at district level hospitals. These are the challenges government has to cope up with in coming days.
So amid all this, Bihar also has elections coming up this year, which I'm guessing have been left in the lurch now. Do we have any idea whether they will be postponed or just cancelled altogether?
Just a few days back, I had spoken to the Chief Electoral Officer. He said we are preparing as per schedules because it is up to Election Commission to take a final call on this. But we are preparing as if it will take place on the scheduled time, that is between October and November. But political parties also started discussing this. ASV Yadav said it cannot be held under the given circumstances. So did Chirag Paswan. And then Sushil Modi said no, elections should be held in time. When we are trying to bring back normalcy in every aspect, why can't election be held? So these kind of things are going. But after all, it's the election commission that has to take a call. Suppose we have just crossed 19,000. Suppose by October we have say 50-60,000 cases and some 25,000 of them are active cases, and we are still grappling with the COVID cases. So how can you think of election under such circumstances? And how can you think of election, 1 or 2 phases? Even if you have say 33,000 extra booths for social distancing, but that would mean that so many people coming to the booth in 1 day or 2-phase election, that would be inviting some kind of trouble. So these are the tricky questions. Election Commission has to take a call. So it is too early to say. We no word as yet on this, but political parties are slowly reconciling to the fact it could be postponed. As of now, there is no word on this. We can't say anything now. But there is apprehension that is in the lurch so far.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explain page. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explain and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like this show, then you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.